Hey, everybody, I'm Scott Weichel. You're listening to My Kind of Country. Thank you so much for joining us on a Monday night. You have heard me play some cuts from this brand new project on the show already, and I'm very excited about it. I don't think there's a better way to listen to Buck Owens than listening to live recordings. And our friends at Omnivore Records have just released a brand new 3 CD set with a whole treasure trove of Buck Owens live recordings, many rare and unreleased recordings. And I'm very happy to have the gentleman who's put this all together and written some fantastic in-depth liner notes with me tonight. We're going to talk about this project and play a whole bunch more of the music for you tonight. It's a pleasure to welcome Scott B. Bomar to My Kind of Country. Scott, my friend, how are you tonight?
I'm good, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it is a blast to talk to you. You are just my go-to person for anything Bakersfield, and you have done so many wonderful projects, and this new one is just stellar.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, a couple of months ago, we picked up the vinyl for the exciting sounds of Buck Owens that was recorded at the Bellevue Theater there in Richmond. And I got to tell you, after I read the liner notes before I listened to it, and I thought, okay, well, I wasn't really expecting the quality to be all that great from what I read, and we put it on the turntable, and I got to tell you, it blew me away. It's like right in your face. I love it.
Yeah, it's really I'm sure I said something in the liner notes overstating it, calling it the Rosetta Stone of country music, but when I heard it, it was like some sort of archaeological discovery, because if you're a Buck fan or a 60s country fan, you know the Carnegie Hall album, and it's such a legendary recording, and in a lot of ways set the bar for live country music recordings in the 60s and beyond. And as far as most of us knew, that was the earliest recording available of a full concert of Buck and the Buckaroos. And when I heard this Richmond show, which was about a year and a half prior, not only was it cool, I thought, well, maybe this is going to be an interesting historical artifact in that we get to hear a poorly recorded version of Buck and the band, but it sounds really good. And, it wasn't professionally recorded, but it was recorded by somebody who set up the mics properly and knew what they were doing, and it's very clean. And I also have to give a lot of credit to Michael Graves, who worked with the source tapes here and was able to really bring them back to life in a way that just sparkles, and it sounds incredible.
It really does, and I was very impressed to read about the whole process that you guys used to bring these recordings back to life, and to fix all the wow and flutter and fix some bad audio, and you just can't tell. I mean, you listen to it and it's just there.
Yeah, and Michael is a great audio restoration guy. He's just got great ears, and he knows how to restore audio sources, whether it be tape or discs or whatever he's working with. He's just one of those people that has that right combination of technical skill and an artistic ear, where he knows how to get something sounding just right without overdoing it to where it sounds like it has been messed with. He knows how to really restore things back to how they were intended to be heard in the first place, and he's really got a gift for that. So huge props to Mike for coming through with some just incredible sound and making us all feel like we're sitting there watching Buck and the Band live.
Absolutely. The exciting sounds of Buck Owens and the Buckaroos at the Richmond, Virginia, at the Bellevue Theater is available on vinyl. You can get it at omnivorerecordings.com, and it is also included in this brand new box set, which is called Adios, Farewell, Goodbye, Good Luck, So Long, On Stage 1964 to 1974, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. It's an incredible set, Scott, and I was just frothing at the mouth to be able to get this thing into my hands and listen to it and play it. And one more question on the Bellevue Theater show before we move along. Was there, was there a recording of the other shows? I know he did 2 shows that day, and was there anything that was left off the tape that you just couldn't save?
There were some things on the tape that were like, Buck and the band, as you hear a little bit on that recording, and also as people have heard on Carnegie Hall, they like to do a lot of like skits and jokes and funny stuff on stage, and some of that stuff I think people have heard plenty of. Some of it's a little corny. It doesn't age as well as the music in every case. So there were a few things that we decided not to include in terms of the show. Now, the tape itself only had one show, so it's not. There were two shows that night that Buck and the band performed, and they back in 1964. They did two shows, but the tape we had was just of one show, so we didn't pull like the best version of this song or that song or anything like that. So what people were hearing is the show, minus a few comedy things that just got a little bit lengthy for for the purpose of what we were trying to present here.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think having the Beatles thing included there is fantastic too. That's that's a glimpse of time where the Beatles were obviously huge at the time, and for Buck and the Buckaroos to do Twist and Shout and include that, it's pretty incredible. And that was also done at the Carnegie Hall concert, which wasn't issued on the original album, but when the Country Music Hall of Fame put out the CD, they included that on there as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that in 1966 when they did the Carnegie Hall show, that the label thought having a Beatles song on there was controversial enough in 1966 that they decided not to do it. And I was surprised listening to the tape from this show in 1964 that they were playing Twist and Shout all the way, back that early. I didn't realize that they had been playing it that long. And so I note on the recording, and I say this in the liner notes, that they do it in kind of a mocking way. It was kind of the only safe way to cover the Beatles as a country artist in 1964 would be to kind of make a bit of a joke out of it. But they do it so well, and they replicate the Beatles sound so well that you can tell, like, there's reverence for the Beatles, even though they have to kind of, for the sake of the audience, make a bit of a joke out of it. So it's kind of a funny thing that they're doing, but at the same time, you're like, dang, they really did it well. And they're kind of over imitating the Beatles in a way, but not in a way that's mean-spirited.
No.
And it's really remarkable how well they do it.
They really did. Yeah, it really does sound fabulous. And I love the other little things in the show. And I'm assuming when you listen to A11 on there that there was someone who was trying to get a picture, and Buck kind of paused. He's like, "It's okay, isn't it?" And let him get right up there and get a picture. I got a kick out of that. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, you can. That's what's fun about the live shows is you sort of hear them reacting to things that they might not have anticipated, and I think that anybody who goes to a live show today of any genre, it's so choreographed, it's so well planned, with all the lightings and the cues and whatever. It is fun to kind of get this window into what a live show was like in 1964, and yeah, somebody might come up and take a picture and the guys on stage react to it, or kind of ham it up for the camera or whatever, but they're just reacting to the moment. So it gives you that sense that every night was probably a little bit different when these guys were on the road.
Yeah, and I've read in Buck's book that Randy Poe put together, that they really didn't do any rehearsing. It was that's just the way they did things, even when they went in the studio. And Buck, or at least in those early years anyway, and Buck just kind of let everybody do what they were going to do, and it somehow worked out.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people have to realize when you think about anybody who was ever a Buckaroo had to be an exceptional musician.
Yeah.
Because Buck did not say, okay, you're going to come in and we're going to woodshed and get the whole band together and we're going to work up the next tour for for the next couple weeks, and then we'll go out and debut this stuff. Sometimes it was like, hey, you're hired because you're the same size as the last guy and you fit the suit, and come on out to Bakersfield, and the first show's 2 days later, and we're not going to rehearse. You just got to know these songs. So when you listen to recordings of the Buckaroos from any era, you have to remind yourself that, like, not only are these guys good, these are the top musicians around, because they have to have the ability to just jump into the deep end and say, okay, here we go. I got to just, fall in and hang on, and no one's going to hold my hand.
Exactly. And Don Rich really is very underrated. I think he was just so phenomenal, and that's why I really prefer, when I listen to Buck Owens, I love listening to the live stuff, because Don is so much more prevalent in the live recordings, and he adds so much to the music and the vocals and those harmonies. You listen, a good example is Ruby. I mean, you listen to the harmonies on that, and it gives you goosebumps on goosebumps.
Yeah, there was some sort of just magic synergy between those guys. I think Don was able to kind of read Buck's mind, and vice versa, and there was just something about, they were like, brothers, in the way that the Louvin brothers or the Everly brothers just have that close harmony that, you have to almost be family to achieve. But they managed to do that without being family. And, when you see the way that the two of them would interact on stage, it was almost like they were completing one another's musical sentences. I think plenty of people have pointed out that, Buck Owens is obviously a great artist, and there's, you can't take anything away from Buck, but Don was the secret sauce. And, having Don there is kind of what made Buck Owens and the Buckaroos really unique. And, it came from Buck's vision. Buck's the one that taught him to play guitar. He didn't even play lead guitar when Buck met him. He was just playing fiddle. And so Buck taught Don to kind of do what Buck wanted him to do, but Don soaked it up so well that he knew how to just have this telepathic ability on stage and know where Buck was going to go, what he was going to do, and he managed to follow him and support him just in an unbelievable way.
Absolutely right. Folks, I do want to mention Scott's website is scottbbomar.com, and he is a Grammy-nominated writer, producer, author, historian. He's worn so many hats in the world of music, and he's got so many great things. I encourage you to check out his website and see all the great things that he's done to help preserve not only country music but other genres of music for generations to come. And omnivorerecordings.com is the website. You can pick up this brand new box set, 3 CDs, Adios, Farewell, Goodbye, Good Luck, So Long, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos on Stage, as well as the vinyl for the exciting sounds of Buck Owens and the Buckaroos. I encourage you to get it all, because the vinyl sounds fabulous. The box set is just great, and it's just wonderful to have this in our hands. Scott, my next question, on the heels of the vinyl release for the show in Richmond, was that kind of, were you just, that was all there was going to be, or was the box set already in mind when that came out?
Well, Cheryl Pawelski from Omnivore has been kind of trying to wrap her mind around the right way to do a Buck Owens live set for years and years and years. So I knew that she had been kind of mulling that over, and I think the biggest challenge that Cheryl was facing was, there's so much live Buck material, but Buck likes to do these medleys. And, how do we put together a set that, you don't want just medley after medley after medley after medley and same song after same song after same song. And so how do you avoid that? And also, how do you make a box set that doesn't wind up being just too many discs and way too expensive? So I think she had played with all kinds of concepts over the years, and so I kind of came in on sort of the tail end of her process, and the two of us put our heads together and started playing with potential track listings, and at one point it was going to potentially be a Bear Family style thing where it was like every live thing Buck had ever done. So it would have had Carnegie Hall, it would have had the Live in Japan album, it would have had the Live in London album. But at some point we kind of came to the realization that, the people who are going to buy this are the Buck Owens fans, and they have those albums already. So how do we narrow this down to something that's really unique and something that isn't music that everybody already has, so they feel like they're just rebuying, something that they've already got. It was a years-long process for Cheryl to kind of come to this point. And the Richmond show was unknown at the time that I think she first started wanting to do something like this. And Omnivore has been a great caretaker of Buck Owens' legacy. They've released, a lot of his material over the years, and has sort of become, I think, in recent years, sort of the unofficial home of the Buck Owens catalog. So the idea of doing a comprehensive live box set in some form or another with varying degrees of exhaustiveness has been definitely discussed and thought about for a long time. And then when the Richmond thing came along, it was just sort of the cherry on top, and I think kind of the catalyst to say, okay, let's get this Richmond show out and also include that as part of a more comprehensive live set.
That's great. And there's a big chunk of previously unissued recordings, and then there's a bunch of recordings. And I noticed the albums that you selected to kind of feature on the last disc were the albums that are very hard to find in the U.S. These were all released overseas in the various places where they were recorded, like Japan and New Zealand and the Sydney Opera House. So it's not real easy to find those albums. So it's a nice thing to be able to have those on the disc. And then also the unreleased stuff. The Macy show, I've got to tell you, was next to the Richmond thing was my favorite, even though the quality is not quite up there with everything else. But, man, what a great show that was. Tell me a little bit about that and how you guys found that.
Yeah, so that Macy's show was 1967. It was not long after they had been to Japan, so you hear some of the same stuff that they played at the Live in Japan. On that show, you hear some of those same things at Macy's. And there's a photo in the box set of the band at Macy's, and in the background there's a poster of the Live in Japan album. So I think they were there, obviously promoting the Live in Japan thing. And it was a radio broadcast, and somebody recorded the broadcast off the radio. So it's not like we have a studio recording or master tape or anything like that. So the audio recording is definitely it dips in quality from the Richmond show and certainly from the officially released live albums. But again, Mike Graves did his work in making it sound as clean and clear as possible. And that's one where you have to listen through the sound quality a little bit to to imagine what it would have sounded like if you were standing there in the room. But it is again just another important historical find, and something that we kind of debated, like, do we include this here? Because it doesn't sound quite as good as some of the other stuff. But ultimately, it was like, nah, it's too good to ignore. We got to include this because we know that people are going to like it.
Oh, yeah. I'm really glad that you did. I love it. I really do. Buck is so animated, and he keeps mentioning, I'm not supposed to say that on the radio, but I just did, and I mean, it's just really cool to listen to that, obviously being a broadcaster, I love hearing stuff like that, and I was really glad to hear that. And then the Toys for Tots thing and the golf tournament thing too, those were also unreleased things that you included in this set. Tell me a little bit about those.
Yeah, so when I did this box set called the Bakersfield Sound a few years back for Bear Family Records, and it's a 10 CD box set of Bakersfield-related recordings. And when I was putting it together, I thought, well, there's got to be plenty of Buck and Merle there because that's what people associate with Bakersfield, but I don't want to pick the most obvious things. I want to pick alternate takes when I can. I want to try to find stuff that maybe nobody's heard. And then, of course, a lot of the other stuff is artists that are not Buck and Merle that people might not be as familiar with that I wanted to kind of expose, and give more attention to. But when I was looking for, what do I want to include from Buck, I was at Buck Owens Enterprises, basically just looking through the tape room and pulling tapes out, and Jim Shaw, who of course was a Buckaroo and is still very much involved in the business side of Buck Owens Enterprises. I found this box from from a Toys for Tots show, and I said, "What is this?" And he said, "I don't know." And so we transferred it, and it was the recording off the board from the 1973 Toys for Tots show that Buck would do these shows every year as a fundraiser thing in Bakersfield at the Bakersfield Civic Auditorium. And so he'd bring out his whole, cast of, he always had like a stable of artists that were signed to his various companies and performed on his road show. So he'd kind of get everybody together, Susan Ray and the whole gang. They would do these big shows. So the recording was off the soundboard and sounded great. So I included 2 or 3 things from that on that Bakersfield box set. In fact, I think those are the only 3 things on this set that have ever been available on CD before.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's it. And so then I went back to that tape, and then I went back to the tape room and said to Jim, like, "Hey, let's keep digging around in here to see what else we find." And that's when I found the golf tournament. Buck would do a golf tournament in Bakersfield every year, another fundraising thing, and they would do a show at the end of the day. And so I found some recordings of Buck and the band, and that's, all those stuff are kind of compressed toward the end of Don's life. And there's some, one of our things I said was we didn't want to repeat too many songs, and you do get a little repetition there between the golf tournament and the Toys for Tots shows, but it felt like, these are just unheard and they're good recordings, and let's put them out there because this is what they were playing at the time. And it's just literally tapes that were made. Who knows who decided to make them, and they got labeled and stuck on a shelf, and they sat on the shelf for decades and decades and decades until I came in with my meddling and said, "Hey, what are these?" So yeah, that was how we found those.
Well, I'm glad that you meddled because it's great to hear them. That's for sure.
Yeah,
it's a great set. So the last disc, let's do a kind of a rundown of that with all the tracks from the live in New Zealand, the Sydney Opera House, the Big in Vegas, live at the Nuggets, the Japan. And when I say Japan, that was the second album that was done. That was, I believe, only released in Japan, right?
Yeah. So Buck and the band went on this tour that was, everybody remembers it differently, and that's what's fun about talking to people is you'll get people that'll say that tour was 3 weeks, and say, "No, that tour was exactly 4 weeks, and I remember because of this." And somebody else say that tour was 6 weeks, and I know because of this. So I'm not exactly sure how long the tour was, but I know that they did a show in Tokyo on March 1st, 1974, and they did a show on March 22nd in New Zealand, and then they did a show on April 8th in Sydney. So it was at least a 4 or 5 week tour, and they were going to all these different places around the world, and Buck was a very popular artist in these different places, but they didn't want to, I guess, just release a ton of Buck Owens live recordings into the U.S. market. So all of these recordings were made and released in the respective markets. So that Tokyo show, that album was only released in Japan. The New Zealand show and the Australia show were only released in those specific places. You mentioned earlier those are hard albums to get because they were never widely available in the U.S. They were only available in those locales. That was another one of those, hard decisions we had to make when we said, if we include these albums in their entirety, this was all one tour, so the set list was pretty similar. And if we just put out, the full rundown of each one, I think we're going to wear people out. So what we did was we took all 3 albums and we compared the track list, and we were able to basically assemble what was the master set list for that tour, because not every album had the exact same set list, but they were similar enough, and the common songs came in the same order that we were able to figure out, like, oh, well, this must have been the master set list for that tour. So let's reconstruct the master set list and take the best version of each one and put it all together so that it runs down like what you would have heard had you gone to one of those shows. And we tried to do like, well, let's not just go back and forth wildly. So let's do a couple songs from Japan, a couple from Australia, a couple from New Zealand, and maybe plug in another couple from Japan so that it flows well and that it actually feels like what you would have experienced had you gone to one of the shows on that tour.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. I think it sounds great. And there was a couple songs I was very surprised to hear. One was Rovin' Gambler, and Buck mentions that his mother and dad, I think, were in the audience for that.
Yeah. It's interesting when you look at some of these, especially with somebody like Buck, who had a million hits by this point. It's always interesting what Buck chose to play in his live shows and what he didn't. Another thing like that on the album is Along Came Jones. They did a version of that at one of the casino shows. And Buck says something like, well, we've never played this before, we'll probably never play it again.
Yeah.
As I know that I don't think they did. But it just sort of makes you go, wonder what made you decide to do that. Why did that make it on the set list?
That was an interesting cut.
Hit,
yeah. Who was doing the voices, the background voices in that? Do you know?
I don't know who was doing that. Probably Doyle.
That's kind of what I thought. I was trying to figure that out, and I got a kick out of that. Yeah, that was another one. I was like, wow, that was an interesting one. I would have never thought they would do that one.
Right. Yeah, it's funny, and also, that obviously was a Lieber and Stoller song, and this whole thing got me just kind of reflecting on Buck's relationship with rock and roll. He did that sort of pledge to country music where he said, I'll never sing a song that is not a rock and roll song, and then he's immediately covering Johnny B. Good. Before that, he's covering the Beatles. He winds up doing a whole album that's got Dylan songs on it, and this whole rock album, and he sort of always would make the argument that these songs are country because they're songs about regular people or whatever, but the reality is that Buck loved rock and roll as much as he loved country music, and he found ways to insert that into his show by doing things like covering Along Came Jones and by closing a ton of his shows with Johnny B. Good in the 70s. So that's another sort of interesting piece that piqued my interest as I was going through all this stuff.
And it was interesting to read about the theory that Buck was trying to kind of morph into more of a band type situation, where he would feature the band and was more of a just an open show with them as opposed to just him. And you're right. I mean, I think he really kind of moved toward that as his career went on.
Yeah. That particularly stood out to me when I was looking at the Richmond show, because of the things that he left out. He didn't play things like Under Your Spell Again and songs that had actually been hits for him, and he was in a moment where all of his records up to a certain point were released as Buck Owens. Then they were all released as Buck Owens and his Buckaroos. And, I just sort of came up with this theory as I was thinking about it, that I think Buck was looking at what was going on. Obviously, the Beatles were such a cultural force that touched, beyond music. They changed everything in terms of youth culture. And, Buck was a guy who was as skilled at business as he was at music. And I'm sure Buck was reading Billboard magazine, and I'm sure that he was looking at the pop world and seeing, it used to be Leslie Gore and Bobby Vinton, and now it's the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And, I think Buck might have and this is just a theory, but I think he might have been trying to say, well, hey, if that's working in the pop world, then that's where things are going. So let's bring that to the country world. So I'm no longer Buck Owens. I'm Buck Owens and his Buckaroos.
Yeah.
And, of course, that goes back to Buck's love for artists like, Bob Wills, who, is from a previous era, but that sort of band-oriented thing would have been something that Buck would have kind of come up with. And, by this point, everything's very solo artist. It's Marty Robbins, it's Roger Miller, it's Jim Reeves, it's Johnny Cash, it's Buck Owens. But I think Buck was sort of saying, maybe it ought to be Buck Owens and his Buckaroos, because we want to package this as a band thing, because the public interest is gravitating toward this band concept. So I don't know if that's what was in Buck's mind or not. I talked to Jim Shaw about it. He said, man, I wish Buck was still here so I could ask him that. It's a good theory, but I don't know either, if that's what Buck kind of had in mind. So it's fun to speculate about those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As you mentioned earlier, too, he had the best musicians, and it certainly was a great way to showcase them, and he had the ability to do that. And certainly, again, with Don Rich, he's just so incredible to me. I think he is just not only a phenomenal musician, but a great singer in his own right. And he was always I always called him Buck's Bonnie Owens, because he was always content to just be kind of in the background,
Yeah, and I know that Don really loved the band, for instance. Meeting Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson, the band, and he was the one who introduced Buck to the Beatles, and I think he broadened Buck's horizons a little bit, and and I don't know, I've heard conflicting things about whether or not Don was really content to be the background guy, or if he had aspirations to get out there and be an artist in his own right. Some people just don't have, they've got the talent, but they don't necessarily have the drive. And I always say Buck Owens was going to be a wealthy man, whether it was from music or something else, because he just had that drive.
Yeah.
And fortunately also had the talent. But a lot of guys that have incredible amounts of talent don't necessarily have that drive to do what it takes to become a well-known artist. And I think that maybe Don didn't have that, didn't have that kind of burning desire to grab the spotlight. But he certainly could have. He was talented enough to do it. And so I've heard people say that people who were close with Don, I've heard them say that he was very happy being a background guy, and I've heard other people that were close to him saying that he kind of secretly wished he kind of wanted to break out a little bit and do his own thing, but maybe he felt a little bit of, maybe not knowing how Buck would react to that, or feeling a little, bit of loyalty to Buck, of like, well, this is kind of my role, and so it is what it is. At the end of the day, I don't think we'll ever know, but, what we do know is that the man was phenomenally talented, and he's one of the greatest sidemen in country music history, and had he decided to become a front man, he would have been great at that too. Incredibly talented guy.
For sure. Well, I appreciate all your time. Just another question or two for you before I let you go. Have you talked to some of the Buckaroos that are still with us and gotten some feedback from this box set? And I know I've seen some great reviews on it so far, but are some of the people that were on this project and involved in this project, what are you hearing from them?
I actually haven't. I haven't reached out to say, hey, what'd you think? Because you never know. You don't want somebody to go, I didn't like it. I don't think that would be the case here. But it was nice to be able to talk with a lot of the folks. I mean, there's obviously a lot of the Buckaroos are no longer with us. And fortunately for me, I got interested in this stuff years ago, and I was able to interview Doyle Holly and to talk with Jerry Brightman and Tom Brumley, and I spoke with a lot of these guys who are not with us now, and so I was able to draw from some of those interviews to make sure that their voice was a part of the liner notes and that their input was present. And Willie Cantu is still with us. I talked to him a good bit as I was putting this together. And Doyle Kurtzinger is with us, Ronnie Jackson, J.D. Maness, Jim Shaw, of course. And Susan Ray, who was kind of witnessed all this because she was touring with Buck, and her husband, Jerry Wiggins, who is no longer with us, was the drummer. So she was a helpful source in terms of offering some insight. But I haven't had a chance to get any feedback from those folks yet, if they've seen it or not. But I hope they like it, and I'm really grateful that whether it's people who I had the chance to speak in depth with years ago and was able to draw from, or whether it's people who gave me new interviews for this, I was grateful to be able to get insight into the people who were there and who were part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever have a chance to meet Buck?
I did. I met Buck a couple of times. I never got the chance to sit down and do a formal interview with him, but there was a band out of Texas called the Derailers that were friends of mine, and through them I got to meet Buck at the Crystal Palace a time or two when they were playing there and have some informal conversations, but never got the chance to sit down and do a formal interview with him. I did with Merle, which I know you have as well, which was great. But I do always wish that I'd had the chance to do a formal interview with Buck, and unfortunately he passed away before I got the opportunity.
Yeah, I did get to see him. I never got to meet him, but back in 1999, he played a show at the Keewaydin Casino in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And from what I understand, it was the last time that he ever played outside of California. And I found a friend of mine called me. I was living in Indianapolis, Indiana at the time. And a friend of mine called me and said, Buck's going to be there. Can you make it? And I'm like, yep, I'll be there. So I literally drove from Indianapolis, Indiana to Sault Ste. Marie, which is on the Canadian border in the northmost part of Michigan, and got to see Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, and I'm really glad I did.
Oh, yeah. Well, I got to see him several times at the Crystal Palace, but the first time was I moved from Nashville to Los Angeles in 2000, and I'd been kind of meaning to get up there. I wanted to see him at the Crystal Palace in Bakersfield, and so I booked, I called and made a reservation for the Saturday night after, well, obviously before it happened, but it was when 9/11 happened. And so I had reservations to go see Buck and the band on Saturday night, and then, of course, the previous Tuesday was when the 9/11 attacks happened, and, at that time, I mean, the world just stopped. I mean, we were all in such shock, and I remember calling up there on Friday and to the Crystal Palace to say, is this still happening? Because, we were all just sort of in that weird, moment of like, seems like everything's kind of stopping or should, or I don't know. And they said, yeah, I think we decided we're going to go ahead and go forward with it. So we went up, and that was the first time I had ever seen him perform live. But definitely memorable, just because I always remember what week it was, because that was such a huge event in in our country. And so Buck was the first event that I attended after a little bit of returning to normalcy.
Wow, that's really great. Well, folks, again, please go to omnivorerecordings.com. You can pick up a copy of Adios, Farewell, Goodbye, Good Luck, So Long, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos on stage 1964 to 1974. And you can also get the vinyl for the exciting sounds of Buck Owens live in Richmond, Virginia. And this box set, you're going to love it. 56-page, beautiful pictures in there. Fantastic in-depth writing from Scott B. Bomar. For music geeks like me, I just ate it right up. Great music, and we're going to play a bunch of that for you tonight. Scott, not only do I want to thank you for taking all this time to be on my show, but thank you for preserving this music and getting it out there so that people like me can enjoy it.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for your show and for keeping this music alive and celebrating it, and just making sure that your introducing it to your listeners and hopefully the future generations. Really appreciate with your show, and I'm honored to be a guest, and I appreciate you inviting me on.